Captain Quibble adjusted his seatbelt, muttering under his breath about how even in the far reaches of the universe, you could never as persistent and annoying as the station's chief engineer, Hank, who sat opposite Dr. Corvin, unceremoniously gnawing on what passed for a protein bar in these parts of space. Nothing like the taste of recycled algae first thing in the morning, Hank grumbled, crumbs dribbling onto his stained jumpsuit. I'm telling you, Doc, one day I'm gonna crack and eat one of those damn lab rats. Dr. Corvin, head scientist and reluctant babysitter of Europa's finest misfits, glanced up from her screen, a tired smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. Pretty sure even the rats have standards, Hank. Hank chuckled, a sound like gravel caught in a blender. Guess they'll be joining the Galactic Council then, huh? He jerked a thumb at the blinking comms panel. Speaking of which, another love letter from our overlords just came in. Dr. Corvin sighed, the weight of the universe, or at least this icy moon, pressing down on her shoulders. She pushed herself away from the cluttered desk, a battlefield of empty coffee cups and data drives, and headed over to the terminal. Let's see what fresh hell we've been blessed with today, she muttered. The message flashed up, a formal notice with all the charm of a tax audit. Galactic Council sanctions imposed, effective immediately. Well, ain't that just the cherry on our shit sundae, Hank commented, peering over her shoulder. How do they expect us to survive out here? Hope and oxygen. Hope's overrated, Corvin replied, her eyes scanning the text. And oxygen's getting pricey. Fancy words for you're screwed if you ask me, came a voice from the doorway. It belonged to Samira, the team's communications specialist and self-appointed sarcasm officer. She flicked a stray lock of hair out of her eyes and joined them, her expression somewhere between amused and annoyed. What's it this time? Another don't do that list from the Cosmic Hall monitors, Corvin shrugged. More or less. No tech exports, no trade, no fun. Sounds like my last relationship, Samira deadpanned, leaning against the wall. Why the crackdown, though? What we do this time, look at them funny. Don't ask me, Hank said. I just fix the pipes and pray they don't burst while I'm taking a shit. Priorities, Corvin replied dryly, though a bit of genuine amusement slipped into her voice. But seriously, this is bad. We've got experiments running, code for playing God, Samira interjected. And without supplies, we're dead in the water, or under it, Corvin continued, ignoring the interruption. And speaking of water, we've got that signal to figure out. Samira raised an eyebrow. The one that's been screaming at us from under the ice like a banshee on a bad day. That's the one, Corvin confirmed. It's getting louder, and until we know what it is, it's a risk, especially now, Hank snorted. Just another Tuesday then, huh? Corvin nodded, feeling the tension in the room like a physical force. It was palpable, like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. We need to keep this under wraps at least until we know more. The council's got ears everywhere. You mean rats, Hank corrected with a wink. Either way, Corvin said, trying to maintain a semblance of authority. We need to be careful. Samira, can you clean up the signal? Give us something to work with. Samira shrugged, her fingers already dancing across her portable console. I'll see what I can do. But if it's a call for help, I'm not sure who's supposed to answer. Probably the same halfwit who thought putting a research station under a frozen ocean was a good idea, Hank said, pushing back his chair. The intercom crackled to life. The voice of Captain Rourke, their nominal leader and eternal pessimist, filled the room. All hands on deck, he ordered, as if they were on a ship and not hundreds of meters beneath Europa's ice. Shed whatever bullshit you're doing and meet me in the main hub. Now. Hank looked at Corvin and Samira with a raised eyebrow. Guess we're in for a fun briefing, Corvin sighed. Probably another pep talk about how we're pioneers on the frontier of human discovery. Rah rah, go team, Samira added with a mock salute, and they all set off down the narrow corridor lined with flickering lights. The main hub was a cramped space cluttered with makeshift stations and an assortment of equipment that screamed desperation rather than organization. Captain Rourke stood by the central console, a forbidding figure with a permanent scowl etched into his face. "Morning, sunshine," Samira greeted him as they filed in. Rourke's eyes narrowed. "I don't do mornings," he growled. "Or sunshine." "What a surprise," Hank muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Rourke ignored him, focusing on the screen. "We've got a situation," he began, his voice tinged with frustration. "As you might have noticed, our beloved councils decided to tighten the noose, but that's not our only problem." He tapped a few keys and the signal appeared, a jagged line of data scrolling across the screen. "This," Rourke continued, "is coming from beneath the ice. It's getting stronger, and it's not background noise or natural phenomena. This is deliberate. So, it's a party invitation," Samira quipped. "Do we RSVP or just show up with a bottle?" Rourke rubbed his temples, a man on the edge. "We need to figure out what it is before the council gets wind. Last thing we need is them breathing down our necks about undisclosed discoveries. Or confiscating the station, leaving us to freeze our asses off," Hank added. Corvin nodded, feeling the weight of their predicament settle in. "Right. We need to work fast but careful. Samira, keep working on the signal. Hank, check the systems and make sure we're not broadcasting anything more than we have to." Hank saluted with exaggerated seriousness. "Aye, aye, Captain Science," Rourke cut in. "Let's get this sorted before we find ourselves out of luck and air." He turned back to the console, dismissing them with a wave. As the team dispersed, Corvin caught sight of Samira still at her station, her eyes glued to the readouts. "You all right?" Corvin asked, stopping beside her. Samira didn't look up. "Sure. Just another day dodging cosmic bullets, right? If you need a break." "No," Samira interrupted, finally meeting Corvin's gaze. "This is important. Besides, someone's gotta keep you lot from getting yourselves killed." Corvin smiled, grateful for the loyalty of her ragtag crew, as mismatched and rough around the edges as they were. "Thanks, Samira." "Anytime," Samira replied, her focus already back on the screen. Corvin left her to it, the corridor echoing with the distant hum of machinery and the ever-present uncertainty that hung over Europa like a storm cloud. Later, as the echo of boots faded down the corridor, Corvin found herself standing alone in the cramped control room, a singular bastion of sanity in a madness of bureaucracy and cosmic wonder. A part of her relished the challenge. There was something intoxicating about the unknown, the thrill of discovery teetering at the edge of disaster. She was a scientist, after all, a purveyor of curiosity in a universe that seemed hell-bent on keeping its secrets. The signal continued to pulse on the screen, a siren call from the deep below. Cryptic, insistent, and undeniably captivating. Corvin leaned back in her chair, contemplating the message it bore and the precarious position it put them in. The sanctions loomed like a shadow, a reminder of the precarious balance they walked. One wrong step, and they'd find themselves adrift in a sea of cosmic politics and icy oblivion. "Here's to hoping we find a way through," she murmured to herself, the words hanging in the air like a prayer to the indifferent stars. The station's lights flickered momentarily, a reminder of the ever-present fragility of their situation. And somewhere beneath Europa's surface, the signal continued to sing its haunting tune, a melody of mystery and danger that promised to upend everything. In the cold, unyielding dark, Dr. Corvin knew one thing for certain. They were in deeper than they'd ever imagined, and there was no going back. Dr. Corvin sat at her cluttered desk, feeling like she was the only sane one aboard Europa Station 42B, though sanity was a relative term this far from Earth. The signal, a headache wrapped in a mystery, continued to scream for attention, like a child throwing a tantrum. Unfortunately, ignoring it wasn't an option. Not with Earth's government breathing down their necks, demanding something miraculous to lift the Galactic Council's sanctions. She was joined by Terk, the station's resourceful engineer, who had a knack for patching things up with whatever was lying around: duct tape, chewing gum, and possibly some dark magic. He ambled in with a cup of something that might once have aspired to be coffee. "Anything new?" Terk asked, the eternal optimist in a sea of cynics. Just the same old symphony of static, Corvin replied, massaging her temples. This signal's like a bad date, keeps calling and won't take no for an answer. Guess we're gonna have to break its heart, Terk said, setting down his coffee with a grimace after one sip. Ugh, tastes like the bottom of a boot. Considering you made it, that's hardly a surprise, Corvin shot back. We need to figure this out fast. The government's expecting us to pull a rabbit out of a frozen hat. Well, I'm fresh out of rabbits, Terk said, leaning back in his chair. But I know a guy who might have one. I'll go check on the reactor core and see if I can squeeze some more juice out of it in the meantime. As Terk made his way to the bowels of the station, where the reactor hummed its steady, reassuring lullaby, Lyra, the station's intuitive biologist, entered the control room, her expression one of intense focus. Lyra had the kind of mind that seemed to understand the universe on a level that was, frankly, unsettling. Got anything, Lyra? Corvin asked, gesturing to the mess of data scrolling across the screens. Lyra shrugged, her eyes never leaving the readouts. Nothing concrete, just a lot of maybes, this signal. It feels alive, you know, like it's trying to tell us something. Great, we've got a chatterbox on our hands, Corvin said. Any idea what it's saying? Could be anything, Lyra replied. A distress signal, a warning, maybe just some alien version of a prank call, Corvin snorted. Fantastic. Let's just hope it's not intergalactic telemarketing. Last thing we need is to buy a timeshare on Mars. Whatever it is, we need to decode it, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos. If we can figure this out, maybe we can convince Earth to give us more time before they tighten the noose. Or at least stop asking for our firstborns, Corvin muttered. Meanwhile, down in the reactor room, Terk was elbow-deep in the station's guts, muttering to himself in a language that was part engineering, part profanity. The reactor was an old beast, temperamental and prone to fits of pique, much like Hank on a bad day. He was midway through coaxing another few kilowatts out of the thing when the comms crackled to life beside him. "Terk, you alive down there?" came Samira's voice, tinged with its usual sarcasm. "Barely," Terk replied, wiping grease from his hands. "But I think I've found a bit more juice. Enough to keep the lights on, at least. Good. We might need a miracle soon, or a distraction, anything to buy us time," Terk sighed. "I'll do my best, but unless you've got a direct line to the divine, miracles might be in short supply. Guess we'll have to make do with what we've got," Samira said, her tone light despite the seriousness of their situation. Back in the control room, Corvin was staring at the signal, willing it to make sense. The room was quiet except for the gentle hum of machinery and the distant sound of Hank swearing at something in the corridor. "All right, what's the plan?" she asked, turning to Lyra. "We keep at it," Lyra said simply. "It's a puzzle, and puzzles can be solved. Preferably before we run out of oxygen," Corvin replied. "Or patience." The station intercom beeped, and Captain Rourke's voice boomed through the speakers, his tone as sunny as a black hole. "This is Rourke. Just a reminder that we're all screwed if we don't pull a rabbit out of our collective hats, so hop to it." "I think Rourke's motivational speaking needs work," Samira commented, joining Lyra and Corvin. "He's about as motivational as a tax audit," Corvin agreed. "But he's right, we need to get this figured out." Lyra continued to sift through the data, her fingers dancing over the console keys. "There's something here," she said, almost to herself. "A pattern. It's trying to resolve itself into something coherent. Like jazz for computers," Samira said with a smirk. "Great, all we need now is a saxophone." Corvin leaned over, studying the screen with a frown. "Keep digging, Lyra. If anyone can make sense of this, it's you." As Lyra worked, Terk rejoined them, looking slightly less grimy but no less weary. "Reactor's stable for now," he announced. "But we're running on fumes. We need a breakthrough fast." "Story of our lives," Samira said, crossing her arms. "Why is it whenever something's about to go right, the universe decides to see if we can juggle while tap dancing?" "Because it's the universe," Corvin replied, "and it hates us." They worked in silence, the weight of their predicament settling over them like a suffocating blanket. The signal pulsed relentlessly, its rhythm almost hypnotic. Outside, Europa's icy surface lay undisturbed, a frozen enigma in the vastness of space. Finally, Lyra made a small noise of triumph. "Got it," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "There's a sequence here, not complete, but it's a start." Corvin leaned in closer. "You sure?" "Positive," Lyra replied. "It's like instructions or a map." "To what?" Samira asked, intrigued. "That I don't know," Lyra admitted. "But it's something big." Corvin felt a flicker of hope, quickly squashed by the reality of their situation. "Can we use this to buy us some time with Earth?" "Possibly," Lyra said, "if we can prove it's valuable." "Well, it's better than nothing," Terk said. "And it beats sitting around waiting for the Council to decide we're expendable." "I'll start drafting a report," Corvin said, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on her again. "Let's hope it's enough to keep us afloat." As they each returned to their stations, the atmosphere shifted slightly, still tense, but with a glimmer of possibility. The unknown lay ahead, as treacherous and unyielding as the icy moon above them. Yet within the chaos there was a sense of purpose, a refusal to yield to the inevitable. Hours later, as the team regrouped, Corvin shared the draft she'd pieced together. "Here it is," she said, handing out the data pads. "Proof that this signal might lead to something game-changing. If we can sell this to Earth, maybe we can buy some time." Samira skimmed over the report, raising an eyebrow. "You think they'll buy it?" "They have to," Corvin replied. "Otherwise, we're done." "At least it's not a total shot in the dark," Terk said, glancing at the data. "There's something tangible here." "We'll send it over ASAP," Corvin said. "Let's just hope they are in the mood to listen." As the report was dispatched, the team settled back into the routine of waiting for a response, waiting for the next disaster, waiting for the station to finally push them over the edge. In the meantime, the signal continued its song, a siren call from the depths that promised salvation or doom in equal measure. "We're in deep," Terk said, echoing the sentiment that weighed on them all. "But we're still here," Corvin replied, her voice firm. "And as long as we're here, we're not giving up." "Here's to stubbornness," Samira said, raising an imaginary glass. "May it carry us through yet another cosmic shitstorm." "And to this signal," Lyra added, her gaze on the screen. "Whatever it is, it's not done with us yet." Corvin nodded, feeling a strange mix of dread and anticipation. They were on the brink, standing at the edge of the unknown, with no choice but to leap. And in the murky depths of Europa, the signal continued to call, its secrets still untold. The signal droned on in the background, an unending monotone that would drive even the most patient monk to a murderous rage. As it happened, Hank, the station's resident curmudgeon, wasn't a monk but was already halfway there. He ambled into the control room, scratching at the stubble lining his jaw like a man who'd given up on understanding personal grooming. "What's the racket?" "Sounds like a cat dying," Hank grumbled, eyeing the screens with disdain. "Pretty sure it's a dying civilization, Hank," Corvin replied, not looking up. Her fingers danced over the keyboard like a mother trying to coax a stubborn child into eating their vegetables. "Or it wants to sell us alien encyclopedias. Jury's out." "Fantastic," Hank said, leaning over the console. "Have we tried turning it off and on again?" "If only it were that simple," Lyra muttered, engrossed in her work. Her eyes darted over the data like a predator stalking its prey, a predator that had been on a diet for too long. "We need to get deeper, understand the layers. This thing's ancient." Samira was lounging nearby, her feet up on a chair, reading the latest installment of Space Epic Fails, a collection she found morbidly inspiring. "So we've got a civilization screaming for help from beneath ice that's thicker than Hank's skull. Lovely." "Hey, watch it," Hank retorted, his lips curling into a sardonic grin. "My skull's been useful. It stopped plenty of blood from reaching my brain." Terk wandered in, still wiping oil from his hands. "I heard something about encyclopedias. Are we selling or buying?" "Neither," Lyra said without missing a beat. "We've got a distress call." "Aw, and here I was hoping for a shopping spree," Terk joked. Seriously though, how do we respond? We don't, not yet, Corvin replied, exasperation pulling at her voice like an unwelcome guest. We haven't even deciphered the whole message. Could be an invitation to a party or a warning to bring our own coffins. Trapped ancient aliens and they didn't even RSVP, Samira quipped, tossing her reader onto the table. Rude. Corvin's screen blinked ominously, an impending storm in the digital sea. Well, there's one part that's clear, she said. They're under Europa's ice and they need help. And here we are, barely able to keep our own ship from falling apart, Hank added. Seems like we're the right folks for the job. Maybe we can trade them some duct tape for their secrets, Terk joked. We've got plenty of that. Yeah, I'm sure an advanced civilization would love our primitive tech, Samira replied. Here's some tape and string. Now save us from the Galactic Council. Lyra looked up from her screen, a rare and almost unsettling gleam of determination in her eyes. We need to figure out how to communicate back. If they've been trapped under ice for what millennia, they're gonna need more than a lifeline. Yeah, like a cosmic pickaxe, Hank grumbled, shaking his head. Or maybe a decent cup of coffee, or both, Corvin suggested. If we can somehow figure out a way to boost our signal, we might be able to reach them. Terk rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I've been tinkering with the comms, might be able to rig something up. Just need to borrow some juice from the reactor. Borrow, huh? Samira said. You still owe it the last few kilowatts you borrowed. Consider it a long-term loan, Terk replied. With high interest. Corvin watched as Terk and Hank headed off to the reactor, their banter echoing down the hallway, a reminder that in space, your greatest allies were as flawed and irreverent as you were. She turned back to Lyra and Samira, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily against her skull. How do you all feel about ghosts? 'Cause it feels like we're about to talk to some, she said, trying to keep her voice light. But the heaviness of the situation was a persistent smog in the room. Well, as long as they're not the vengeful kind, Samira replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Lyra looked back at her console, her focus intense. We need to get into their heads. If they're sending signals, there's a chance they've got tech we haven't even dreamed of. Yeah, but do they have sarcasm? Because that's our real superpower, Samira quipped, stretching her arms over her head. Meanwhile, in the reactor room, Terk and Hank were knee-deep in cables and wires, the reactor humming with a steady rhythm that was comforting in its familiarity. Terk pulled out a panel, revealing a labyrinth of circuits that looked like spaghetti after a food fight. Think we can siphon off some power without blowing the whole station? Hank asked, his tone skeptical. Only one way to find out, Terk said, grinning like a madman. Stand back. I'm going to try something stupid. Hank stepped back, crossing his arms. You're the boss. Just don't expect me to clean up the explosion. Terk fiddled with the wires, his expression one of deep concentration. This was what he lived for, the challenge, the thrill of making the impossible barely achievable. Back in the control room, Corvin's console pinged, displaying a new burst of information. She leaned over, her heart skipping a beat. Lyra, look at this, she said, her voice infused with urgency. There's more to the signal. It's like a blueprint or something. Lyra hurried over, her eyes widening as she scanned the data. This is incredible. It's like they're describing the ice, how to get through it. Makes sense. If they're trapped, they'd know how to get out, Samira said. Assuming the universe isn't just playing another prank on us. Corvin nodded, torn between excitement and dread. Whatever it is, we need to make contact. If we can decode this completely, Earth might have to take us seriously. Or they'll just think we've gone space mad, Samira replied. But hey, at least we're giving them a hell of a story. In the reactor room, Terk flipped a switch and the lights flickered ominously. Hank winced, but the station held steady, the hum of the reactor unchanged. Terk grinned, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Got it. More power to the comms. Now we just need to hope it doesn't fry. Glad you're feeling lucky today, Hank said, shaking his head. Though I'm not sure how much we can push our luck. Back in the control room, the renewed power flowed into the systems, the signal growing clearer, more insistent. It was alive in a way that sent shivers down Corvin's spine. We're getting closer, Lyra said, her voice distant. I think they are trying to tell us something specific. Can you make it out? Corvin asked. It's like coordinates, Lyra said, her brow furrowed. A place on Europa, somewhere specific. Should we check it out? Samira asked, her tone equal parts intrigue and trepidation. If we don't, we'll never know, Corvin said, a sense of inevitability settling over her. And right now, we need every advantage we can get. With newfound determination, they set to work deciphering the signal's hidden secrets. Eyes blurred into one another, the station's artificial day and night cycles largely ignored. Hank returned, looking more bedraggled than usual. So, any more breakthroughs, or are we still talking to ourselves? We've got coordinates, Lyra announced, her voice tired but triumphant. A treasure map, maybe, Samira said with a smirk. Or a guide to the best hidden restaurant on Europa. Considering our luck, probably the former, Corvin replied. But we need to check it out. How are we going to do that? Hank asked. We're not exactly swimming in resources here. We improvise, Terk said as he rejoined the group, wiping the last of the grease from his hands. It's what we do best. Corvin couldn't help but feel a sliver of hope breaking through the clouds of their predicament, even as she knew the road ahead was fraught with danger. All right, let's get to work. We don't have time to waste. As they set about preparing for the expedition, the room buzzed with a mixture of excitement and dread, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like the gravity of a small planet. Who knows what we'll find down there? Samira said, strapping on her gear. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll be an alien hot tub. Yeah, just our luck it's set to boil, Terk replied, checking his equipment with a practiced hand. Whatever it is, it's bound to be interesting, Lyra said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips for the first time in what felt like eons. And that's something, at least. As their preparations continued, the signal pulsed steadily, a reminder of the unknown waiting beneath Europa's icy crust. With Earth breathing down their necks and the Galactic Council's sanctions looming, failure wasn't an option. And in the depths of the ice, something waited, a mystery older than humanity itself, calling out to them with a voice that transcended time and space. All right, team, let's go find out what ghosts like to talk about, Corvin said, her voice firm and resolute. And let's hope it's a conversation worth having. With that, the team moved out, each of them acutely aware of the stakes and the specter of failure that lurked behind every decision. They were explorers, scientists, and jokers all rolled into one, bound by the shared madness of their mission and the relentless call of the signal. And as they descended into the unknown, hopes hanging by the thinnest of threads, the signal continued its song, a siren call from the deep, echoing through the frozen expanse of Europa, promising secrets and perhaps salvation to those brave or foolish enough to listen. Europa Station 42B was buzzing with a kind of frenetic energy more akin to ants on a sugar high than organized scientific thought. The Galactic Council's latest edict had trickled down like a bad rash. Sanctions were now tighter than a miser's fist. Essential supplies, already scarce as hen's teeth, were about to become the stuff of legends. Hank, our resident curmudgeon, summed it up best. Looks like we're dining on cosmic dust and recycled air now, Doctor. Corvin, trying to maintain some semblance of authority amidst the chaos, was busy playing diplomat between the machine and human parts of the station. All right, folks, we've lost more supplies. We need to make everything stretch more than Terk's last shopping spree. Samira quipped, waving her well-thumbed copy of Space Epic Fails in the air like a battle flag. Hey, that was necessary, Terk protested from a tangle of cables and wires, a screwdriver clenched between his teeth. You can't expect me to jury-rig this comm booster without a few essentials. Essentials, right? Samira snorted. Like the time you said we needed that chocolate fountain, Terk grinned, unapologetic. Morale booster, Samira. Totally different ballgame. Hank, who'd been eavesdropping while pretending to fix a panel, piped in. If we're talking about essentials, can someone explain why we've got 6 boxes of novelty socks and no goddamn coffee? Priorities, Hank, Samira said, smirking. Warm feet, clear mind. Lyra, who had been silently immersed in her data, finally looked up. We need to focus, people. The signal's getting clearer, but we're gonna need more than socks and chocolate to make it work. Don't forget, we've got Terk's magic touch, Corvin said dryly, nodding to where Terk was elbow-deep in electronics. I hear he once fixed a toaster with a paperclip and a prayer. Hey, that prayer was vital, Terk replied, his voice muffled by wires. And we can't all be blessed with your charm, Corvin. Corvin sighed, rubbing her temples. The pressure was mounting, and the weight of Earth's expectations was a leaden cloak around her shoulders. We're going to have to improvise. Everything we've got, everything we might have, it's all on the line here. Improvise is just a fancy word for we have no bloody idea what we're doing, isn't it? Hank muttered. In this context, pretty much, Corvin admitted. But it's that or give up, and I'm not in a giving up mood today. Terk finished soldering a connection and sat back, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. All right, this should do it. Boosted signal, compliments of my essentials. Let's hope it doesn't blow us up, Samira said, watching him with a mixture of skepticism and admiration. I've grown rather fond of my limbs, you know. Relax, Samira, Terk said, snapping the panel back into place. If it blows, at least you'll get to haunt me. Imagine the possibilities. In the control room, Corvin and Lyra were hunched over their screens, the glow painting their faces with ghostly light. They watched as the signal's waveform danced across the display, now stronger, more pronounced. It was a symphony of hope composed on a score of desperation. All right, let's see what we can do with this, Corvin said, her fingers flying over the keyboard like a pianist on caffeine. If only Earth could see us now, Lyra mused. Bet they'd be so proud of how we're cobbling this together. Yeah, too bad they're too busy counting their sanctions to care about what we're doing, Samira said, crossing her arms. But hey, maybe if we pull this off, we'll get a parade, or a pat on the back and a bigger pile of problems, Hank said, strolling in with a cup of something that might have once been coffee. Not that I'm cynical or anything. We've got coordinates, Lyra said, more to herself than anyone else. The ice is thinner there. If we can figure out a way to make contact, we might just have a fighting chance. Corvin leaned back, studying the readout with a critical eye. If we can reach them, maybe, just maybe, we'll find something that can help with the council. Assuming they're friendly and not the type to view us as an intrigue, Samira added, ever the pessimist. Well, if they do, I hope they like their food sarcastic and a bit overdone, Terk joked, rejoining the group. Let's face it, we're not exactly gourmet fare. But we're here and we're trying, Corvin said, more to rally her own spirits than anyone else's. And that's got to count for something. Maybe the council will send us a thank you card, Hank said, rolling his eyes. Or a bill, Samira suggested. The team set to work once more, their actions a well-choreographed dance of desperation and hope. The signal was their lifeline, their shot at something beyond survival. As they labored, their banter was a constant, a reminder that they were human in a universe that often seemed to forget that fact. Iors bled into each other, the station's artificial cycles as meaningless as a politician's promise. They were united in their mission, driven by the ghostly call from beneath the ice. Terk paced, tapping a finger against his chin as he reviewed the makeshift device he'd cobbled together. This should give us a real shot at making contact. Power's stable, we just need to keep our fingers crossed and maybe tied in a knot, Samira muttered. Just in case. All right, everyone, Corvin said, pulling their attention back. This is it. We're putting our faith in Terk's contraption and the hope that whatever's down there wants to talk, or at least doesn't want to eat us, Hank added with a snort. Here goes, Lyra said, her voice the calm eye of their storm as she triggered the sequence. The station's systems hummed to life, the signal booster straining under the load but holding steady. It was a symphony of cobbled-together ingenuity, and it sang with a note of defiance. As the minutes ticked by, the signal sharpened, detailing coordinates and a sequence that seemed to loop endlessly. A message, ancient and enduring, echoing through the void. "There it is," Lyra said softly, as if afraid the sound of her voice might shatter their fragile connection. "We've got something," Corvin confirmed, feeling the pulse of adrenaline flood her veins. "Let's hope it's the good kind of something," Terk said, unable to suppress a grin despite the tension. The signal pulsed back, a rhythmic response that felt almost conversational. It was an echo from another world, another time, and it was speaking to them in a language they were just beginning to understand. "Are they responding?" Samira asked, her disbelief mirrored in the wide eyes of her crewmates. "I think they are," Corvin replied, her voice a whisper of awe. "Well, that's unexpected," Hank said, his usual cynicism taking a backseat to genuine surprise. "Unexpected but welcome," Terk said, his eyes fixed on the data streaming across the screen. "Maybe we're not so alone out here after all. Or maybe we're just about to make the first interstellar faux pas," Samira quipped, ever the skeptic. The signal continued, its rhythm steady, like a heartbeat beneath the ice. It was a lifeline, a connection to something greater than themselves, and it was calling them with a voice that transcended all the petty concerns of sanctions and supply shortages. "All right," Corvin said, her voice firm. "We need to focus on making contact. This is our chance. Chance or not, it's what we've got," Hank agreed, his demeanor uncharacteristically serious. They worked in silence, the gravity of their task weighing on them like the crushing depths of the ocean. Each keystroke, each adjustment was a step into the unknown, a journey to a place where few had dared tread. The Iors dragged on, fatigue a relentless specter haunting their every move, but they pressed on, driven by the hope that had carried them this far. "Terk, any luck boosting the output?" Corvin asked, her focus unwavering. "Luck? We're talking about Terk here," Samira interjected, a sly grin on her face. "Hey, I'm all about luck," Terk said with a chuckle. "And skill, don't forget skill." Finally, as though responding to their collective will, the signal cleared, the message that had been hidden for so long unveiling itself in a burst of clarity. "There it is," Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. Corvin studied the screen, her mind racing with possibilities. It was an invitation, a roadmap, a guide to a place where answers might be found. And it was waiting for them beneath Europa's icy surface. "We've got what we need," Corvin said, her voice a mix of relief and anticipation. "Now we just need to figure out how to get there, and hope whatever's down there isn't waiting with a knife and fork," Hank added, shaking his head. "That's the spirit, Hank," Samira said, rolling her eyes. "Always the optimist. Call it realism," Hank replied with a shrug. As they stood there, contemplating the enormity of what lay ahead, they couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie, of unity in the face of the unknown. They were explorers on the edge of discovery, scientists daring to dream, cynics holding onto hope. And as they prepared to descend into the frozen depths of Europa, the signal continued its song, a siren call that promised answers and perhaps, just perhaps, a way to save them all. "All right, team," Corvin said, her voice steady and resolute. "Let's go find out what's waiting for us beneath the ice." With that, they readied themselves for the journey, their hearts filled with equal parts dread and anticipation. It was a mission fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it was theirs, and they embraced it with open arms and a touch of irreverent humor. And as they descended into the abyss, hope flickered in the darkness, a light guiding their way through the unknown, promising a future beyond the constraints of their present. The control room was a symphony of chaos masquerading as cooperation. Lights blinked erratically, consoles beeped with frantic insistence, and Terk's latest contraption emitted a low hum that suggested it was either about to work or explode and take half the station with it. Samira eyed it cautiously, as one might a particularly untrustworthy stray cat. "Feels like a Saturday night on Earth, doesn't it?" Hank remarked, his sarcasm cutting through the tension like a rusty saw. He took a sip of his drink, which might have been water before it went through the station's reclamation system one too many times. "All we're missing is the booze and bad decisions. They are implied," Samira said, not looking up from her station. You know, since we're actually trying to make contact with aliens who might want to eat us. Ah yes, the universal icebreaker. Take me to your leader, but please don't base me first, Terk chimed in, running diagnostics on his cobbled-together signal booster. Worst case, they invite us for dinner and we're the main course. Every party needs a snack, Lyra said, her focus unwavering on the stream of data cascading across her screen. Here's hoping they're more interested in conversation than a buffet. Dr. Corvin, usual bastion of authority, leaned against a console, pinching the bridge of her nose as though trying to physically stave off the headache brewing behind her eyes. Let's keep the cannibal jokes to a minimum until we know more, all right. I'd rather not tempt fate. Fate's never needed much tempting in my experience, Hank quipped, his grin more of a grimace. Outside, the ice of Europa stretched endlessly, a vast, frozen desert hiding secrets that had slumbered for millennia. Beneath its surface lay the signal's source, a puzzle wrapped in a riddle and topped with a bow labeled "Do Not Open Until Desperation." A sudden rumble shook the station, a deep, ominous groan that suggested the universe had finally decided it was time to perform its party trick. The floor underneath everyone's feet shivered, lights flickered, and then the unmistakable wail of an alarm sliced through the room with all the subtlety of a chainsaw. Well, that's never a good sound, Terk said, his fingers a blur on the keyboard as he tried to ascertain the source of the disturbance. Looks like, yep, dome malfunction. I hope everyone remembered their swimming trunks perfect, Samira groaned. Just what we needed, more existential threats. As if Galactic Council sanctions weren't enough, Corvin moved swiftly, her voice cutting through the rising panic like a captain steering a ship through a storm. All right, we've trained for this. Terk, get down to engineering. Lyra, keep monitoring the signal. Samira, Hank with me. We need to stabilize the dome. On it, Terk replied, already halfway out the door. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, tell my toolbox I love it. Stay focused, people, Corvin said, rallying her crew with the kind of determination that bordered on stubborn denial. We've got this. They sprinted down the corridor, the station's artificial gravity feeling just a bit heavier with each step, as if the universe was leaning on them for support. The path to engineering was a gauntlet of flickering lights and hissing pipes, the station itself seeming to conspire against them. Remind me why we signed up for this, Samira panted, vaulting over a haphazardly stacked pile of crates. The promise of fame, fortune, and a free lunch, pretty sure it was the lunch, Hank replied, skidding to a halt as they reached the bulkhead leading to the dome's control center. Though by now, I'd settle for a vending machine that actually works. Corvin punched the override code into the panel, the door sliding open with a reluctant groan that suggested it would rather be anywhere else. Inside, the situation was, predictably, a mess. Panels flashed warnings in alarming shades of red, and the air buzzed with the electric scent of overheated circuits. Okay, let's see what we're dealing with, Corvin said, commandeering a control console. Looks like we've got a pressure imbalance. If we don't fix this fast, we're going to have a very intimate meeting with Europa's surface. Great, Hank said, with all the enthusiasm of a man facing a firing squad. I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a pancake. Samira took the console beside Corvin, her fingers dancing over the keys. If I reroute power from the secondary systems, we might stabilize the dome long enough to get a repair team down there. Do it, Corvin said, her voice steady but urgent. Consider it done, Samira replied, executing the command with a flourish. Let's just hope the station doesn't have a meltdown in the process. It's the little things that make life exciting, Hank muttered, standing by with a toolkit that looked more fit for a museum than a repair job. Meanwhile, Terk found himself elbow-deep in the guts of the station, surrounded by a tangled mess of wires and components that looked as though they'd been designed by a committee of particularly quarrelsome cats. He worked with the grim determination of a man who knew his life depended on his skill, or at least his ability to fake it convincingly. Okay, baby. Don't let me down now, Terk murmured to the station's temperamental systems, coaxing them back to life with all the finesse of a magician performing a particularly risky escape act. Just hold together long enough for us to survive this mess. Back in the control center, Samira let out a triumphant whoop. We've got stabilization, for now at least. Everyone can breathe easy, literally. Nice work, Corvin said, relief evident in her voice. Now let's make sure this doesn't happen again, right? Hank chimed in, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Because nothing says fun like constant vigilance and the threat of imminent death. The alarm, apparently satisfied that it had done its job, finally fell silent, leaving the crew with the sounds of their own heavy breathing and the persistent hum of the station's life support systems. Well, that was fun, Samira said, leaning back in her chair with a sigh. What's next on our list of near-death experiences? Hopefully, a break, Corvin said, rubbing her temples. Though I wouldn't put money on it. Lyra's voice crackled over the intercom, the static barely masking the urgency in her tone. You guys might want to get back here. I've got something you'll want to see. Can a crisis ever just resolve itself? Hank grumbled, but he was already moving, the rest of the team hot on his heels. They arrived back at the control room to find Lyra glued to her monitor, her usual calm facade cracked by the excitement bubbling beneath. You're not going to believe this, she said, beckoning them over. Try us, Corvin said, crowding in with the others. Lyra tapped a few keys, the screen filling with a jumble of symbols and numbers that danced across the display like a drunken spider on a typewriter. It's the message. I've managed to decipher part of it. The room went silent, the weight of her words sinking in. They all leaned in, eyes scanning the indecipherable chaos. So what does it say? Samira asked, breaking the silence. It's a blueprint, Lyra said, her voice tinged with awe. A design for some kind of technology. Something powerful, powerful enough to get the Galactic Council off our backs. Terk asked, rejoining them with a significant dab of grease smeared across his forehead. Potentially, Lyra said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. If we can figure it out. Well, isn't that just a lovely little twist, Hank said, rubbing his hands together. The universe throws us a bone after all. It's not going to be easy, Corvin cautioned, though a spark of hope had ignited in her eyes. But if we can make this work, we might just pull off the impossible, Samira finished, the excitement in her voice infectious. As they stood there contemplating the possibilities before them, the station around them seemed to hum with newfound energy. The signal continued its steady rhythm, a promise of salvation wrapped in the enigma of alien technology. All right, team, Corvin said, rallying them once more. This is our chance. Let's figure this out and show the Galactic Council what we're made of. Yeah, Hank said, his grin returning with a vengeance. Because if there's one thing we're good at, it's defying the odds. The mood in the room shifted, the gloom of moments ago replaced by determination. They were battered, bruised, but not beaten. If anything, the challenges had only hardened their resolve. Let's get to work, Corvin said, her voice steady and sure. They dove back into the task with renewed vigor, the promise of a solution driving them forward. The dome might have shaken their confidence, but it hadn't broken it. In fact, it had only fused their commitment to each other and their mission. For better or worse, they were all in this together, humanity's last, best hope wrapped in a ragtag team of misfits and dreamers. And as they set to deciphering the alien blueprint, one thing was certain. They were going to need all the sarcasm, cunning, and stubbornness they could muster. Because in space, no one could hear you scream, but they could definitely hear the snark. The silence in Europa Station 42B's control room was the kind that came before either profound revelation or utter disaster. Lyra had just announced she'd cracked part of the alien signal, and the team was still processing the implications. Hank, never one to let a moment of potential catastrophe go unremarked, cleared his throat. So, we've got an alien IKEA instruction manual, he quipped, folding his arms and leaning against a console. I hope it's not for a bookshelf. I can't even assemble furniture from Earth without losing a few screws. Or your sanity, Samira added, a wry smile tugging at her lips as she squinted at the screen filled with unintelligible symbols. Though I suppose sanity's overrated. Corvin, rubbing her temples like she could physically massage the stress away, turned to Lyra. What exactly are we looking at? And more importantly, do we need to worry about it blowing up in our faces? Lyra shrugged, her face a mixture of excitement and bemusement. It's definitely a blueprint, but for what, I'm not entirely sure. It's complex, maybe a generator or a weapon, or perhaps something entirely new. But it's definitely beyond anything we've got in the catalog. Terk popped up, wiping a streak of grime off his arm with a rag that looked more grease than cloth. Whatever it is, it's a damned good distraction from playing space plumber, which is basically what I signed up for. Corvin shot him a look that landed somewhere between appreciation and exasperation. Let's focus on this blueprint, figure out how it could potentially help us. Maybe lift these damned Galactic Council sanctions, or at least keep us from dying in a vacuum, Hank said, flashing a grin that was all teeth and no sincerity. Which is always a plus. The gravity of their situation, both literal and metaphorical, hung in the air. Earth's government was on their backs, the Galactic Council had their thumbs screws out, and the alien signal was an unsolved mystery that might hold the key to survival or the code to their demise. With renewed vigor, the team dove into the task. Terk and Lyra became a makeshift R&D department, debating over alien glyphs like two scholars arguing over an ancient text, while Hank and Samira worked on keeping the station running. Or at least, running as well as a patchwork of second-hand parts and desperate hopes could run. The atmosphere was tense yet charged, like the moment before a thunderclap. Lyra pointed to a particularly complex sequence in the alien code, her eyes narrowing in thought. Look here, it's something like a power input. Maybe a reactor, or it could be a recipe for alien souffle, Hank snorted, earning a sharp elbow to the ribs from Samira. Keep those insights coming, Hank, Samira said, rolling her eyes. The universe needs your wisdom like I need a hole in my spacesuit. Hey, everyone needs a hobby, Hank retorted, still smiling despite the hard jab. Corvin joined Lyra and Terk, peering at the screen. If we can build this, whatever it is, we might be able to turn the tables. The Galactic Council can't keep us under their thumb if we've got something they want. Yeah, and if we don't blow ourselves up in the process, Terk added, scratching his head. That's always a concern. Think positive, Lyra chimed in, though her voice held a note of doubt. Maybe it'll just blow up our enemies instead. Optimism, Terk said with a mock sagely nod. The key to not losing your mind in space, speaking of which, Corvin said, straightening up. We need to set priorities. First, stabilize the station. Then focus on this signal. If it's a way out of this mess, we need to understand it fully. Samira, taking a break from running diagnostics on the station's systems, chimed in. I'll keep our life support and systems running. No point in cracking alien tech if we end up as popsicles on Europa's surface. Good point, Hank said, hefting a tool bag that had seen better days. I'll keep things from falling apart in the meantime. Can't have all that space dust getting cozy with our circuitry. Corvin nodded, a gleam of determination in her eyes. Let's get to work then. We're not out of the woods yet, but I'll be damned if we don't give it our best shot. The group dispersed, each returning to their tasks with the kind of weary determination born from too many close calls and not nearly enough wins. Hank returned to the bowels of the station, where the air was thick with the scent of overheated metal and the hum of machinery that sounded more like a death rattle than a well-oiled engine. Samira was deep in the control room's guts, fingers flicking switches and tapping keys with the precision of someone who knew that a wrong move might just send them tumbling into the icy embrace of Europa. Her focus was unyielding, eyes darting over displays with the kind of fierce concentration that would scare off lesser mortals. Meanwhile, Lyra and Terk continued to decipher the alien code, their discussions punctuated by mutters of frustration and the occasional eureka, when a sequence aligned with their understanding of physics, or at least, didn't contradict them outright. "This part here," Lyra murmured, pointing to a new section. "It could be an energy converter, or a very aggressive paperweight," Terk replied, squinting at the symbols. "I'm just saying, it'd make a hell of a doorstop. Let's hope it's more useful than that," Lyra said, chuckling despite herself. "If it's a converter, we might be able to bridge it with our existing systems." Terk nodded, the gears visibly turning in his mind. "Yeah, if we survive long enough to try it." "Okay, let's map it out and see what we can rig up." As the hours ticked by, the station settled into a rhythm, the crew functioning like cogs in a machine that was barely holding together. The threat of imminent disaster hung over them, but beneath it all, a thread of hope had taken root. If they could decipher this alien puzzle, they might finally have an answer to the Galactic Council's sanctions, a way to claw back from the brink. Hank returned from his maintenance rounds, a smudge of oil painting a streak across his cheek. "Hey, did I miss anything? Please tell me we're not about to be launched into space without a lifeboat." "Depends on your definition of miss," Samira said, not looking up from her station. "But we're still here, so that's something. Always nice to know we're not space dust yet," Hank replied, flashing a grin. Corvin, reappearing with a cup of the station's infamous reclaimed water, yesterday's coffee, today's hydration, took a deep breath. "We're making progress, but it's a long road. Let's try and get some rest, rotate shifts. We need to be sharp when the time comes." And so they settled into a cycle of work and rest, the station a tiny island of humanity amid a sea of starlight. They were up against impossible odds, with only their wits, a half-deciphered alien blueprint, and a dwindling supply of caffeine to see them through. But if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving in the most ridiculous of circumstances. As the artificial day-night cycle of the station continued its relentless march, the team found their rhythm. The dome held steady, the station systems hummed with a semblance of normalcy, and the alien signal beckoned like a siren call promising salvation, or madness. And as they toiled, the specter of Europa's secrets loomed large, its icy facade hiding answers that could save or doom them all. "Hey, Terk," Hank called, strolling into the control room with a bounce in his step that suggested either insanity or caffeination. "Figure out what that doohickey does yet?" "Working on it," Terk replied, his eyes red-rimmed and focused. "But get this, I think we're onto something that could revolutionize our energy systems, or short-circuit them," Lyra added from her seat where she was still buried in alien calculus. "But hey, at least it'll be exciting." "Exciting," Hank echoed, leaning over to squint at the screen. "That's one word for it." "Another is suicidal, but let's not get bogged down in semantics." Corvin, stepping in with her usual air of authority tempered by weariness, clapped a hand on Hank's shoulder. "Keep your spirits up. We're closer than we've ever been to a breakthrough." The team pressed on, each contributing their skills to the puzzle that was their survival. And though the odds were stacked against them like a house of cards in a hurricane, they pressed on regardless. After all, when the universe handed you a mystery wrapped in a crisis, what choice did you have but to unravel it? As they worked, banter flowed through the control room like a lifeline, pulling them together even as the odds threatened to tear them apart. "So what's plan B if this all goes south?" Samira asked, her voice light but edged with seriousness. "Easy," Hank replied without missing a beat. "We blame the intern." Corvin raised an eyebrow. "We don't have an intern." Hank shrugged, feigning innocence with a grin. "Well, we had to blame someone. Can't be us, can it?" Their laughter echoed through the control room, a small rebellion against the universe's indifference. And as they continued their work, a sense of purpose took root, a resolve to defy the odds, to solve the unsolvable, and maybe, just maybe, to show the galaxy what humanity was truly made of. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about proving they could thrive, even in the darkest corners of the universe. Okay, let's recap, Hank said, leaning back in his chair, feet propped up on the console like he owned the place. Which, in a way, he did. If by owned you meant held together with duct tape and dreams. We're on a space station that's falling apart faster than my last relationship. We've got an alien signal that could either save us or blow us to kingdom come, and we're on the Galactic Council's naughty list. Did I miss anything? Just the part where the signal might be an ancient distress call from a civilization that makes us look like cavemen with Wi-Fi. Samira replied, not missing a beat as she glared at a stubborn control panel. No pressure, though. Sounds like a typical Monday, Hank grinned. Except it's Thursday, I think. Corvin strode into the control room, a no-nonsense look etched on her face that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else, perhaps sipping a margarita on a beach, if beaches hadn't gone extinct. Lyra, Terk, any updates? And do tell me something that doesn't make my headache worse. Lyra waved a hand over the console, looking like a high priestess of some obscure religion dedicated to binary code. We've managed to decode more of the signal. I think we're looking at instructions for a device that, if we can build it, might just tweak quantum fields or something equally batty. Batty is good, Hank said, better than outright insanity. Terk rubbed his temples, mentally juggling alien physics and the rapidly dwindling caffeine reserves. We're close to understanding it. But close doesn't count unless you're playing horseshoes or hand grenades, or alien engineering, Lyra added with a wry smile. Right, Corvin said, drumming her fingers on the table with impatience. Assuming we don't kill ourselves first. If we manage to build this thing and it works, it might just be enough to get the Galactic Council off our backs, or at least convince them we're too crazy to mess with, Samira chimed in. Which honestly might be more effective. Speaking of crazy, Hank said, what's plan B? You know, in case this little science fair project of yours decides to take the express route to Big Boom. We'll cross that abyss when we get to it, Corvin replied, her voice tinged with that special brand of optimism that comes from having no other options. For now, let's focus on not blowing ourselves up. Wise words, as always, Hank said, giving her a mock salute. All right, gang, let's get to tinkering. The team dispersed once more, slipping into their roles like actors in a play where the set was on the brink of collapse. Samira and Hank returned to the innards of the station, a labyrinth of wires and pipes that even a minotaur would need a GPS to navigate. Meanwhile, Terk and Lyra hunched over the alien blueprint, arguing heatedly about whether a particular alien glyph represented a capacitor or the intergalactic symbol for warning. Do not lick. You know, Terk said, massaging the bridge of his nose with the air of a man who'd rather be unclogging toilets. I never thought I'd say this, but I kinda miss dealing with backed-up sewage. Lyra chuckled, her eyes never leaving the screen. At least sewage is predictable. This, she gestured wildly at the alien hieroglyphs, is like trying to decode a cat's diary. Cats keep diaries now, only the really vindictive ones, Lyra deadpanned. Back in the bowels of the station, Hank and Samira were wrangling a particularly belligerent piece of machinery that seemed intent on self-destructing just for the fun of it. Come on, you stubborn bucket of bolts, Hank muttered, wielding his wrench like a conductor's baton. Work with me here. Samira peered at him, one eyebrow raised. You talk to all the equipment like that. Only the ones I'm on a first-name basis with, Hank grinned. This here's Rusty. He's got a temper, but he means well. I'm sure he's thrilled to hear that, Samira replied dryly. And here I thought I was the crazy one. You are, Hank said, fixing her with a mock-serious look, but you're our kind of crazy. As the station hummed along, or perhaps limped was more accurate, Corvin found herself pacing the corridors, a habit she'd picked up back when being a space station commander meant more paperwork and less dodging existential threats. Rounding a corner, she nearly collided with Lyra, who was sprinting down the hallway like a human comet. Whoa, easy there, Corvin said, catching Lyra by the shoulders before she could rocket past. "What's the rush?" Lyra, panting and wide-eyed, thrust a data pad into Corvin's hands. "I think we've got it. The blueprint, it's some kind of energy manipulator. We can use it to power the whole station." Corvin blinked, her brain taking a moment to process the words. "You mean?" "Yeah." Lyra nodded, a grin spreading across her face like sunlight through clouds. "Unlimited energy. If we're right, that is." Corvin felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest, and for a moment she wondered if she'd finally snapped. "Okay, gather the others. Let's see if we can make this happen." In the control room, the atmosphere was charged with an energy that had been sorely lacking since the sanctions came down. Hope, that elusive bastard, had decided to make a guest appearance. Terk and Lyra presented their findings with the nervous excitement of over-caffeinated scientists on the cusp of a breakthrough or a nervous breakdown. "So we think this," Lyra said, pointing at the holographic display, "is a kind of quantum energy manipulator. If we can build it, we could bypass the Council's sanctions entirely, and possibly power the station indefinitely." Terk finished, his expression a mix of awe and skepticism. "Or, vaporize ourselves. A small price to pay," Hank quipped, eyeing the display with an exaggerated nod. "I've always wanted to be immortalized in a nebula." Corvin crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between the display and her team. "All right. How long will it take to build?" Terk scratched his chin, a thoughtful frown tugging at his lips. "We're looking at least a week, maybe more if we hit any snags. And given our luck, that's almost guaranteed." "Of course," Corvin said with a resigned sigh. "Nothing worth having ever comes easy." Samira leaned back in her chair, a rare smile playing on her lips. "Well, if we pull this off, we'll be heroes. Or at the very least not fugitives." "High stakes," Hank said, winking at her. "Just the way I like him." With the plan set, the team threw themselves into their work, the prospect of success a tantalizing carrot dangling just out of reach. They sketched designs, scavenged parts from every nook and cranny of the station, and argued over the finer points of alien engineering until their voices grew hoarse. And through it all, the alien signal continued its relentless transmission, a monotonous reminder of both their potential salvation and ever-present peril. In the ensuing days, the station buzzed with activity. Terk and Lyra became fixtures in the lab, hunched over their workstations in a dance of caffeine-fueled brilliance. Hank and Samira scoured the station for the parts they needed, often ending up in sections that hadn't seen human faces since the last ice age. Even Corvin found herself knee-deep in wires and circuitry, her hands dirted with grease for the first time since her academy days. It was oddly refreshing, like rediscovering a long-lost part of herself that wasn't beaten down by bureaucracy and red tape. Finally, after a week that felt like a year's worth of dodging cosmic bullets, the device was ready. The team gathered in the control room, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Hank stood by the main console, his fingers hovering over the initiate button like a man about to defuse a bomb. "Well, here goes nothing," he said, flashing a grin that was more nerves than bravado. "Or everything." "Nice of you to hedge your bets," Samira said, crossing her arms as she watched the proceedings with a skeptical eye. "Not that I blame you," Hank Corvin said, her voice steady despite the butterflies doing somersaults in her stomach. "Do it." With a flourish that was as much for show as it was for his own sanity, Hank pressed the button. For a moment nothing happened. Silence, thick and oppressive, descended upon the control room like a shroud. The team held their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, with a hum that resonated through the station's bones, the device came to life. Lights flickered back on, stronger than before. The consoles lit up with a vitality they hadn't seen in years. The station thrummed with an energy that felt almost alive. Lyra let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Holy, it worked," Terk said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. "It actually worked." Corvin let out a laugh, the tension she'd been holding onto finally dissolving. "Good job, team." Samira was already on her feet, running diagnostics with the speed of someone who'd been preparing for this precise moment her whole life. Readings are stable. We're drawing energy from, well, everywhere. Hank threw his arms up in victory, his grin wide enough to split his face. Guess we won't be getting spaced after all. Drinks on me tonight. Assuming we still have any, Samira pointed out, but her teasing was light-hearted, almost giddy with relief. Well, if the council still wants to play hardball, Terk said, his fingers flying over the console, they'll have to deal with the fact that we're not exactly powerless anymore. Lyra nodded, her eyes bright with the spark of discovery. And I think we've got more surprises up our sleeve. This technology, it could change everything. Corvin allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated hope. Against all odds, they'd done it. They'd taken a gamble on an alien signal and turned it into a lifeline. The Galactic Council would have to acknowledge it and maybe, just maybe, respect humanity's resilience. All right, she said, her voice firm and brimming with pride. Let's get in touch with the Council. It's time they understood exactly who they're dealing with. The team erupted in cheers and applause, their voices echoing through the corridors like a triumphant battle cry. It was a victory, not just against the impossible odds stacked against them, but a testament to their ingenuity, their determination, and their refusal to be cast aside. As the celebrations wound down and the practicalities of their newfound energy source took center stage, Hank sidled up to Samira, a sly grin on his face. So, think we're heroes now, she chuckled, elbowing him lightly. Nah, just a bunch of stubborn fools who refuse to roll over. But I'll take it, damn right, Hank said, slinging an arm around her shoulders. Damn right. And as Europa Station 42B settled into its new rhythm, buoyed by the energy of a civilization long forgotten, the team prepared to face the galaxy with a renewed sense of purpose, and perhaps a little swagger in their step. Because if there was one thing they'd proven, it was that humanity might be down, but it was never out. The cheers were still echoing off the metal walls as Hank leaned on the console, trying to catch his breath. Well, I suppose that means Galactic Council can shove their sanctions where the sun don't shine, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Not that there's much sun out here anyway. Samira smirked, the glow of victory still fresh on her face. Yeah, maybe they should update their threats. Sanction to the depths of Europa has a nice ring to it. From her seat, Corvin was already drafting a message to Earth, one that would hopefully convince them to get the Council off their backs. We should send them a fruit basket, she muttered dryly, or maybe a box of our finest space dust. Terk snorted, his fingers a blur across the keyboard as he verified that their new power source wasn't about to blow them all to smithereens. I hear space dust pairs well with a nice bottle of sarcasm. Lyra, still basking in the glow of their accomplishment, pointed at the now silent alien signal. Do you think they're still out there? She asked, half to herself. Who? Hank shot her a look. The aliens? Yeah, Lyra nodded. I mean, they built this thing, they must have been smart, and if they're still out there, then they're probably laughing their alien heads off at us, Samira finished for her. But hey, if they're smart enough to build this, maybe they're smart enough to have a sense of humor. Assuming humor translates across species, Corvin said, her voice laced with skepticism. We could be the galaxy's most successful sitcom without knowing it. Hank grinned. I'd like to think I'm the star of the show. More like the comic relief, Terk shot back, earning a chuckle from the rest of the team. The mood in the control room shifted, a palpable mix of excitement and trepidation settling over them. It was the thrill of standing on the precipice of something new, something vast and unknown. And for once, they weren't staring into the abyss with dread, but with the glimmer of possibility. All right, Corvin said, pulling everyone back from their musings. Let's get in touch with Earth and let them know we've got something that'll make the Council wet their pants. You think they'll believe us? Samira asked, skepticism etched on her brow. Corvin shrugged. After this, I don't care if they think we're running on fairy dust. If it keeps the lights on and the stations running, they can call it whatever they want. The transmission back to Earth was brief, filled with the kind of technical jargon that only Terk and Lyra could spout without breaking a sweat. The response was equally swift and slightly incredulous. Apparently, Earth was having a hard time wrapping their heads around the idea that a backwater station on Europa had just outsmarted the entire Galactic Council. "We're either going to be hailed as geniuses or hauled away for questioning," Terk observed, not entirely sure which he preferred. "Either way, it's a step up," Hank said, drumming his fingers on the console. "Question is, what do we do next?" Corvin leaned back, a thoughtful expression settling over her features. "We learn. We figure out everything we can about this technology and we see what else we can do with it." "You're talking about contacting them, aren't you?" Lyra said, eyes gleaming with the prospect of further alien interaction. Corvin nodded. "If they are still out there, it could mean a whole new chapter for humanity. Trade, technology, maybe even alliances. Or they could decide we're pests and squash us like bugs," Samira pointed out. "Optimistic as always," Hank replied, though there was no bite in his words. "Look," Corvin said, turning serious, "we've already beaten the odds once. And I think we've shown that humanity isn't just a bunch of primitives flailing around in the dark." "Speak for yourself," Hank muttered, though he wore a grin. As they watched the data stream from the newly active energy manipulator, the possibilities stretched ahead of them like an uncharted starfield. They'd done the impossible, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem like something to fear. It was something to explore. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. News of their breakthrough spread faster than a gossiping AI, and before long, the Galactic Council was forced to acknowledge the ingenuity of the human race, or at least the stubbornness that refused to let them fade into insignificance. With the sanctions lifted, supply runs resumed, bringing with them the kind of luxuries the crew had almost forgotten about. Real coffee, fresh fruit, materials that didn't look like they'd been scavenged from a junkyard. Hank was in his element, orchestrating the chaos of restocking like a maestro. "I've missed this," he confessed to Samira, who was busy trying to keep track of inventory. "It's like Christmas, but with more cursing and fewer sweaters." "Depends on whose family you're talking about," Samira replied, jotting down numbers with a frown. "You've got a strange idea of festive cheer." Lyra was practically living in the lab, her mind a whirlwind of ideas sparked by the alien technology. Every new development was like unwrapping a gift left by a long-absent benefactor, one who had a penchant for quantum mechanics and a wicked sense of humor. "I think I've found a way to use this tech to improve our communication arrays," she announced one day, her eyes alight with discovery. "We could extend our range by light years." Terk raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to share that with the rest of the galaxy? We might end up getting more than we bargained for." Lyra shrugged. "What's life without a little risk?" Corvin, meanwhile, was knee-deep in negotiations with Earth and the Galactic Council, trying to leverage their newfound position into something that could secure humanity's place on the galactic stage. "It's like trying to negotiate with a pack of wolves," she grumbled to Terk, who'd been roped into acting as her sounding board. "Only these wolves have lawyers and a penchant for red tape." "Isn't that just politics in a nutshell?" Terk replied, sipping a cup of coffee that was more caffeine than substance. "At least we're not on the menu anymore." "Small victories," Corvin said, though there was a hint of satisfaction in her voice. As the station hummed with renewed energy, both literal and figurative, the team found themselves looking not just at the stars, but beyond them. The alien technology was a key, one that could unlock doors they hadn't even known existed. "What do you think we'll find?" Samira asked Hank one evening as they watched Europa's icy surface glide by beneath them. Hank shrugged, his gaze distant. "More questions probably, but that's the fun of it, isn't it? Not knowing what's out there. And the potential to get squashed like bugs," he laughed. "Well, wouldn't be the first time humanity's tried poking something bigger than itself." They sat in companionable silence, the weight of possibility hanging between them like a tangible thing. Each of them knew that their path wasn't going to be easy. The universe was vast and unforgiving, and they were still a long way from understanding all of its secrets. But they were closer now, closer than they'd ever dared to dream. As the days turned into weeks and the station settled into a new kind of routine, the team found themselves swept up in a tide of exploration and inquiry. They were explorers, pioneers on the brink of something extraordinary. "Think we'll ever meet them?" Terk mused during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions. Lyra shrugged, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "Maybe. If they are still around. And if they are," Corvin added, looking up from her own work, "they'll know we're here, and that we're ready to talk." "Assuming they don't squash us," Samira reminded them, though the edge had long since left her words. "Hey, if that happens," Hank said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile, "at least we'll go out on a high note." "And a caffeinated one," Terk added, raising his mug in a mock toast. The prospect of reaching out to the alien civilization, if it still existed, was daunting to say the least. But it was also exhilarating, the kind of challenge that made them feel alive in a way few things could. They were on the cusp of something magnificent, a bridge between what they knew and the vast, tantalizing unknown. "All right," Corvin said, pulling them back to the task at hand. "Let's get to work. We've got a galaxy to introduce ourselves to." As the team settled into their respective tasks, the weight of their achievement and the road that lay ahead settled around them like a comfortable cloak. They'd come so far and overcome so much. The future was unfurling before them, vast and unpredictable. But if humanity had proven anything, it was that they thrived on unpredictability. They were stubborn, resourceful, and unafraid to take a leap into the unknown. And as Europa Station 42B whirred and hummed its way through the cosmos, its crew set their sights on the stars, ready to face whatever challenge